Of course, the one thing I forget to do is switch over to the mic. Damn it. All right, guys, let's start that over. So, welcome into this Denver Broncos Syndicate live stream. I am your host, Gage Madrid, coming at you with some massive breaking news. The Denver Broncos have waived running back Melvin Gordon. That was announced this morning a few minutes ago, and quite frankly, I can't really say I'm surprised. His fumble cost us a win yesterday. Yeah, go figure. Go figure. But yeah, man, his fumble was basically the reason we lost. It absolutely killed all momentum that we had in the game, and in the second half, the offense was just not able to get anything going. Overall, Melvin Gordon's production this season just has not been there, and in key situations, he's fumbled. He's been thrust into that RB1 role, then he's been benched, then he's been thrust back into the starting lineup. It's just been a really weird saga for Melvin Gordon this season. Now, Melvin Gordon, of course, has always been a very polarizing figure in Broncos country ever since he was signed by the Chargers. He was signed from the Chargers back in 2020. Now, obviously, former division rival, there's always some complacency there, but the thing that also kind of rubbed Broncos country the wrong way when John Elway made this move was that we already had a two-time 1,000-yard rusher in Phillip Lindsay on the roster, and he was making peanuts on the dollar in comparison to what Melvin Gordon was making. Melvin Gordon was signed to a 2-year, $16 million deal by John Elway, and overall, you can say he never lived up to it. And then this offseason, he was brought back by new general manager George Paton on a relatively cheap deal. Initially, he was, of course, going to be the backup to Javonte Williams. But then after Williams went down, Gordon was essentially thrust into that RB1 role. And from the beginning of the season on, man, Melvin Gordon his play was not there. You think back to week 1 when he had that key goal line fumble up in Seattle. And then after that, he's gone on to have 4 more fumbles for a grand total of 5 this season. So, quite frankly, you just can't trust Melvin Gordon in key situations. I don't know if it's a mental thing. I feel like it has to be at this point, right? Because otherwise, I don't know. I'll say it, he is a talented player. RR, welcome in. Again, Melvin Gordon has talent. He's got some nice speed as a runner. He has fairly decent vision. I mean, in his first 2 seasons in Denver, he rushed for over 900 yards and a combined 17 touchdowns. But aside from that, man, Melvin Gordon, he just completely fumbles the bag, no pun intended, in key situations. And it's a real shame because Melvin Gordon is somebody that the team thought that they were going to be able to rely on, and now it's just clear that they can't. I'm curious, Broncos country, how do you guys feel about this? I mean, I feel at this point both sides needed a fresh start, right? I'd definitely love to hear some opinions on this for sure. I mean, Melvin Gordon is somebody that when you go out and sign a former division rival to begin with, there's always going to be some of that hatred and complacency because we spent 5 years prior to Melvin Gordon coming to Denver cheering against him. And he had some really good games against us during his time with the Chargers. And on top of that, of course, when you had a Denver native Colorado kid, Phillip Lindsay, in the building, the move to sign Melvin Gordon just rubbed a lot of Broncos country the wrong way. And ever since then, I feel like Melvin Gordon was never really embraced as a Denver Bronco. And again, some of that is and isn't his fault. I also think back to when he got arrested for that DUI in 2020. He showcased off-field irresponsibility there. There have been multiple instances where Melvin Gordon has complained about his usage in the offense and has complained about his role on the team. And overall, it just doesn't seem like Melvin Gordon was a team player, and that's a shame because, again, I'll keep reiterating this, Melvin Gordon is a talented running back. He just mentally, it feels like, doesn't have the makeup to be a top-tier running back in the league. You think back to his time with the Chargers when he held out because he wanted to get paid, and then he ended up basically losing his job to Austin Eckler, fellow Colorado kid. I mean, I don't know, man. Melvin Gordon, I wish him nothing but the best wherever he ends up. But I don't know, man. I gotta imagine Melvin Gordon's best days in the NFL are behind him. We look at this season, for example. I'm actually gonna pull up Melvin Gordon's. Sorry, guys, for the kind of disorganization here. I wanted to see this season. Melvin Gordon has 90 carries for 318 yards, only averaging 3.5 yards per carry, along with the 2 touchdowns. If his production were overall better, you could probably justify his fumbling issues. But since the production hasn't been there, you just had to cut your losses at that point. So, Pasujla, again, I always mess up your name. I am so sorry. What are my hopes for the rest of the season? I actually feel like Russell Wilson played his best game as a Denver Bronco yesterday. He hit the easy passes and the easy completions that were there. He had some shots that he took downfield. Unfortunately, a couple of them were ended up getting called back because of penalties, and one was dropped by Kendall Hinton. So overall, I want to see Russell Wilson continue to get in a rhythm. Yesterday, the Broncos were in their first game with a new offensive play caller in Clint Kubiak, son of former Broncos head coach Gary Kubiak. And Clint also was the offensive coordinator and play caller for the Minnesota Vikings last year, and he did a really good job, I feel like, especially with the first plays of the game in script, in structure. I feel like Clint Kubiak did a good job. So I want to see the offense continue to build on what they did yesterday in the passing game. The run game yesterday simply was not good enough. Melvin Gordon was awful. Even before his fumble, he was not productive. Latavius Murray was our best rusher, and he didn't even average 3 yards per carry. So another thing I'd like to see is our run game take a next step forward in its development. I'd like to see the Broncos utilize Chase Edmonds more now that Melvin Gordon is no longer in the picture, as well as Marlon Mack, who's been inactive the past couple of weeks. This move now frees up some of these other guys to get back into the fold, as well as Mike Boone when he eventually comes off injured reserve from his high ankle sprain. So I'd also like to see the run game take a next step forward in its development. And also defensively, I feel like the team really let us down yesterday. Ajiro Evero put Pat Surtain, I feel like, in some bad situations. And Ajiro's been fantastic the entirety of the season. I can't talk, sorry. But yesterday I feel like was the weakest game for the Broncos as a defensive unit. So hopefully we can bounce back from that. So overall, that's what I would like to see from the Broncos in these final few games. I don't think playoffs are a realistic expectation, obviously, at 3-7, but I do feel like taking those next step forward in development as a team and Russell Wilson just getting more and more comfortable, I feel like are going to be the next steps forward the Broncos need to take in their development. But I feel like cutting their losses with Melvin Gordon was the right move and the first step in that direction, quite frankly. Overall, I feel like the Broncos have established a losing culture over the past few years. Ever since Super Bowl 50, the vibe in the locker room just feels like the team knows they're going to lose. They don't expect to win, and that's not the standard in Denver. The standard in Denver is that you're going to expect to win every single game. That's the standard that Pat Bowlen set in place, and that's the standard that we're going to expect Rob Walton that is the standard that we are going to expect Rob Walton to hold up. I apologize, I cannot talk. So overall, I feel like we need to get back to those standards and those winning ways if we're going to have a chance to have a winning organization in Denver again, because right now we just don't have that. And I feel like cutting our losses with players such as Melvin Gordon, who aren't going to bring that type of mentality and that type of attitude to our culture that we're trying to build, that was the right move. I look at teams such as the Detroit Lions, for example. I know Derek from Detroit Lions Syndicate is in there. Yeah, I agree. If you run the ball on the third down of the 2-minute warning, you win the game. I couldn't agree more. I mean, you would have at least been in a much better situation. You would have taken 40 seconds off the clock, and they would have only gotten the ball back with 1:15 and no timeouts left. So, in my opinion, Nathaniel Hackett, even though he relinquished play calling yesterday, it was still pretty clear that the game management stuff is way too much for him. I don't think that cutting ties with Nathaniel Hackett in season is going to be the move, just because of the lack of interim options on the roster. But Nathaniel Hackett is going to go one and done. There's no way that he can save himself in these next 7 games unless the team literally goes undefeated and we somehow sneak into the playoffs. But that's not going to happen. We're a 7-loss football team. We struggle in situational football. Yesterday, we had several examples where Hackett should have declined a couple of penalties to put the Raiders in second and long situations as opposed to first and long situations, and he just didn't do that. I recall 2 examples of that. So in my opinion, even though the play calling responsibilities have been stripped from Nathaniel Hackett, the game management stuff just is way too much for him. Go the fuck away, stupid thing. Sorry, I dropped an F-bomb. 25 cents in the swear jar. But yeah, man, I just feel like the game management stuff and the responsibilities of a head coach in the 2 minute, I'm assuming you mean in the 2-minute situation that the Raiders got the ball back in, Audie. I mean, at that point, you just have to tell your defense to stay disciplined and not blow your assignments in zone coverage. The last play of the game on the game-winning touchdown to Davante Adams, I believe the coverage was cover 3. I haven't seen the all-22 yet, but I believe it was cover 3, and Surtain completely blew his assignment. He turned his hips because Davante essentially fooled him on his route. He fooled him into thinking he was running a deep over route, and then Davante snapped off to the corner. And so that was a blown assignment by Pat Surtain. It was essentially a good player getting beat by another good player. So in that situation, you have to tell your defensive players to not blow their assignments in zone coverage and stay disciplined and stay on your man when you're in man coverage. And unfortunately, the Broncos blew their assignments in zone coverage twice, and that's what ended up losing the game in that 2-minute situation. You think about the big play to Josh Jacobs right before setting up the game tying field goal. And then obviously going into overtime, they blew the assignment in zone coverage, and Pat Surtain ended up giving up the game-winning touchdown. So again, you just have to stay disciplined in those situations, and that goes back to coaching. This team is not being coached to be a disciplined football team. The Broncos literally lead the league in penalties. I know this was initially a Melvin Gordon stream, but we've now kind of broken off into a tangent about Nathaniel Hackett. This team is undisciplined and poorly coached, and that all culminated in yesterday's loss to the Raiders. So now that Melvin Gordon is gone, and now that we've established that we're no longer going to tolerate this losing culture, I feel like we've taken the step forward that we needed to take. Absolutely. We completely had the Raiders defense at their mercy. And I mean, we had the Raiders offense at their mercy, excuse me. And quite frankly, it was poor discipline and poor coaching in the final 2 minutes in crunch time that ended up costing us. And it was the same thing at the end of the first half when we were going down to try to make it a 17-7 ball game. Poor discipline and poor coaching and poor fundamentals there from Melvin Gordon, and that fumble ended up losing it for us. And then, of course, we had the discombobulation following that led to the blocked field goal. Robert Pena, welcome in. Broncos country is definitely riding this morning, riding their way to the insane asylum. So yeah, man, the question now becomes, what is next for Melvin Gordon? I have to imagine that some team is probably going to pick him up off waivers. He does bring some value to your team, especially as an RB2. But Melvin Gordon's days as the feature back on some team is obviously done. Melvin Gordon has shown that you can't trust him in key clutch situations, and that is a real shame because, again, he's got the talent. All right, guys, I'm again curious. What do you think this message sends to the players moving forward long term? Because I feel that Nathaniel Hackett has at least realized that his job is on the line, so he has made some moves to try to change the culture. Of course, he recognized his own shortcomings too little too late, maybe, and relinquished the offensive play calling duties. And then, obviously, with Melvin Gordon costing us the game, he ended up cutting our losses there. But aside from that, what I want to know is, like, do you feel that the Broncos can salvage this with Nathaniel Hackett? Because I don't believe they can. Yesterday's blunders from Nathaniel Hackett absolutely proved, in my opinion, that you couldn't salvage it. Despite giving up the play calling duties, he looked way in over his head with the game management stuff. So now that brings the question, what do you do from here? In my opinion, you go out and you hire someone who's going to continue to cater to Russell Wilson's strengths. I feel like Clint Kubiak did a pretty good job at that, especially in the scripted play calling yesterday. So we need to find someone head coaching wise who's going to continue that offensively, as well as, in my opinion, try to keep Ejiro Evero as our defensive coordinator. He's done a phenomenal job. Although yesterday he kind of got exposed a little bit by Davante Adams, I still feel like Ejiro Evero has done a phenomenal job as defensive coordinator, and he's still a young, brilliant mind in the NFL that's only going to continue to grow and get better. So I feel that that's the philosophy the Broncos need to employ. Head coaching candidates I would definitely be looking at include guys like Dan Quinn, Jonathan Gannon. I don't know if Sean Payton's realistic because we'd have to trade for his rights from the Saints, and the Saints would probably want a king's ransom to give up those rights. But I feel that some guys, again, like Jonathan Gannon and Dan Quinn could be very solid options. We probably should have hired Kevin O'Connell in the offseason, if we're being honest with ourselves. Nathaniel Hackett was honestly hired, in my opinion, to try to entice Aaron Rodgers to come here. As much as George Paton does not want to say that and admit that out loud, that's why Nathaniel Hackett was brought in. And once the Broncos had to pivot off Aaron Rodgers and move on to Russell Wilson, Nathaniel Hackett literally just kind of was a yes man and went along with it. Oh, Robert, you were at the game too? That's awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. Both sides literally tried to lose the game. I said that in my post-game video as I was walking out of the stadium. Both teams literally were trying to put themselves in situations to lose the game, but ultimately the Broncos ended up doing a better job at it, or a worse job at it if you want to look at it that way. But I feel that the Raiders definitely show that there's still a long way to go. I, again, don't know if Josh McDaniels was the right hire for them, but it's pretty bad when you're a Broncos team that can't even take advantage of a Raiders team that's also trying to shoot themselves in the foot. Absolutely, Robert. Defensively, Denver had their worst game of the season yesterday. And quite frankly, I can't even really be mad at them for it because they've carried us the entirety of the year. Even though yesterday they had their moments where they got exposed, I feel like that was a result of depletion of personnel, because in the first matchup against the Raiders, that was when we had Bradley Chubb obviously still on the team, and we had a healthy Randy Gregory. And we had Ronald Darby on the other side of Pat Surtain, so that allowed us to play a lot more man-on-man coverage against Davante Adams. Oh, okay, you live here in Denver too, Robert. Gotcha. Right on. So anyway, in the first game against the Raiders, all of that allowed us to play a lot more press man with Pat Surtain against Davante Adams. And yesterday, we weren't really able to do that. We had to play a lot more off coverage, a lot more zone coverage, and we couldn't be as aggressive defensively because we were down in personnel. And that really showed, because I feel like in our first matchup against the Raiders, we did a really good job of taking away the Raiders' passing game, in particular with Devontae Adams. But in the second matchup, we did not do a very good job of that at all. All right, guys, we're going to wind this stream down. I'm going to chop up this stream and get it out as its own individual video. But I wanted to just, again, let you voice your opinions on the Melvin Gordon move, and kind of just overall get your thoughts on what you think this means for the team long term, because I feel like this sends a message to the locker room that we're going to at least try to eliminate this losing mentality and this losing culture from the team. Whether we'll be successful in that, I don't know. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and get this video chopped up and get an individual video out for Melvin Gordon. But thank you so much, guys. And I'm going to... Thank you. God, I cannot talk today. I'm not a morning person. I have not had enough caffeine, but thank you so much for tuning in, guys. I really appreciate it. I am your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out and let's ride.